Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being with us on this Friday. I'm Leslie Adamy. We begin tonight with tracking COVID-19 in area schools. Students across the state have been making their way back to the classroom for in-person learning, many in phases. And Texas health and education leaders are trying to create more transparency about the cases reported. Our Julissa Garza breaks down how the state is tracking novel coronavirus cases across public schools and what local health officials are saying tonight about the numbers. Here in the Coastal Bend, it is tonight's top story.
As schools across Texas adapt to new changes brought on by the coronavirus pandemic, the State Health Department and Texas Education Agency are working together to track COVID-19 cases in the classroom. The state launched a database earlier this month. So far, more than 3,400 students across Texas have tested positive. The TEA COVID-19 dashboard also reporting more than 2,800 positive cases in staff. When it comes to positive cases at our local schools, Health Director Annette Rodriguez says the health district hasn't seen a lot of cases from in-person learning.
What we've seen is that they do call us and they do report the positives, but the majority of them have been virtual. So these kids are at home in school, virtually, but they're still getting sick, which tells us what we all know is that we have a lot of community transmission, and that's what we're seeing.
The Corpus Christi Independent School District tonight reporting 24 positive COVID-19 cases in students and 7 in staff. Between August 1st and September 20th, less than 1% of students and staff members across the state have tested positive. Rodriguez says this makes sense because the majority of students are learning from home.
I believe the numbers to be very small right now, very reasonable. But again, we're using those numbers as a baseline because we want to see what happens October 5th if everybody decides to go ahead and start back to school instruction at a much, higher capacity than what they're at right now. That's our concern.
Texas public schools are required to report confirmed positive cases to the state within 24 hours. Now CCISD is working to implement the next phase of their reopening plans, separating students out by 4 feet apart instead of the CDC's recommended 6 feet. Rodriguez says this is concerning.
This 4 feet between people, one cough, one sneeze, you've got a lot of kids now that are going to pick up COVID-19, and that's unfortunate.
A spokesperson for CCISD releasing this statement saying maintaining a distance of 6 feet might not be possible when higher numbers of students must be accommodated. And as we approach flu season during a pandemic, Rodriguez says parents should ask their children about their day to find out what practices are being used at school. Julissa Garza, 3 News.